You can't run a business like you did in the 1980s, the 1990s, or even the 2010s. And you can't run a university or a community college or a trade school like you did back then. The economy changes, education has to change along with it. Ronald Reagan believed in timeless principles, but he was always ready to disrupt the status quo. So when it comes to post-secondary education, we have to be comfortable with good disruption. How do we outsmart and outrun the rest of the world? How do we operate within the systems we have and improve opportunities for our students? How do we innovate? What are the possibilities that we can seize? So please, if you would join me in welcoming not one, not two, but three state commissioners of higher education: Dr. Shannon Gilkey of Rhode Island, Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid of Louisiana, and Dr. Carlos Santiago of Massachusetts. And to lead this conversation, a leading thinker in this space, the president of Strada Impact and former president of the University of Utah, Dr. Ruth Watkins.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, and thank you all for being with us. What an incredible opportunity today to think about possibilities in post-secondary education that have in fact been catalyzed through the pandemic. There is little question in my mind as a former university president that this past year and a half has been one of the most challenging for leaders in post-secondary ed. Certainly, commissioners have done a lot of heavy lifting through these challenges, and we're so fortunate to have two innovative commissioners with us today. The opportunities, however, through this time have also been great, breaking down barriers that have been long-standing to innovation, to nimbleness, to change, creating opportunities for partnerships with industry in ways that are often difficult without some catalyst for change. So this has created an opportunity for all of us to think about how we can achieve better outcomes through post-secondary ed, better outcomes for individuals and their families, better outcomes for communities, better outcomes for industries, states, and our nation. What an opportunity to have leaders with us today. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you have worked with students and student support in your state, really thinking, how can we do better to help people who are struggling to stay in school, people who have left, people who need to return?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Excited to be a part of RISE 2021. It is a critical question, obviously. The students are at the heart of what we do. I would say as we think about the pandemic, sort of two parts to the answer. First of all, when we went sort of flipped the light switch in 2 weeks and went 100% online in higher education, I saw call centers being stood up and students being contacted to say, do you need technology? What help do you need? How can we support you? And so when we looked at our retention numbers previous spring to that spring, we saw that we lost very few students. We did a really good job. But then as the pandemic continued, certainly working parents, student parents, and others had sort of uncertainty and lack of predictability, affordability challenges. So those things all exacerbated the challenge. So we have thought about in Louisiana, COVID is an accelerant to move good systems forward. But also we understand that COVID has, as a result, meant that students who were, those individuals who were serving least were also significantly impacted. And so how do we think about women, minorities, low-income students as a state that's trying to increase educational attainment and that already has equity gaps? How do we lean into that? The other last thing I'd say is we did ask the students, what has worked in the pandemic for you? And as we move beyond the pandemic, what should we take with us? And what they said, of course, was hybrid personalized support. They now have that expectation that someone is going to say, how are you doing? How can we support you? What more do you need?
Very wise, asking the students about their needs and also addressing disparities. Commissioner Gilkey, let's hear from you about your approach to help students.
Sure. Well, I think the pandemic taught higher ed, or at least surfaced up some observations. First, our institutions of higher education, they can mobilize themselves when called to action. I mean, I was working at a community college system during the heart of the pandemic, and we were doing everything from using our 3D printers to print face shields for our healthcare workers to moving about 100,000 students online within 2 weeks so we could deliver. And so, one of the critiques of higher ed is the slow ability to innovate. When called to action, higher ed can be mobilized. So that was one observation. The second observation is that we learned the same hard lesson during the pandemic and now that we did in the 2008 economic recession. And that is the significant number of folks who are dislocated when there are big economic swings in this country are those that don't have a post-secondary credential. The third thing that we learned is that business and industry are using the opportunity of the pandemic and other economic swings to pivot and integrate more technology, whether it's automation, whether it's looking at advances in technology to provide their services or goods. Higher education needs to use this opportunity as well to pivot its delivery model so that we can meet that robust workforce needs. So that was on the hearts and minds of how to deliver post-secondary education as an outset of the pandemic.
That's very, very wise. I think, of course, not only our students had needs, but at your institutions, the institutions that you support and that your state's economy need these institutions to remain vibrant and to meet needs. Do you have insights or thoughts about how you've helped your institutions be more nimble, innovate, and weather this period? And maybe we got to start with you this time, Shannon. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think it's number one, supporting our faculty and staff to pivot their classrooms. When you look at the whole system of higher education, particularly the mass system of higher education, we have a lot of career and technical faculty around the country that need a lot of technological professional development, particularly in the trades, which is, according to labor market, a huge need in this country to help them kind of do basic delivery in an online platform. The other thing is to support, in the pandemic, a public health crisis that we haven't experienced, certainly in my lifetime in higher ed, and maybe go back another one, is how do you make sure that campuses are helping students and their faculty and staff not only be safe, but also feel safe so they can return and remain on campuses, on their campus when personal learning to re-engage in that.
Yes. Kim, how about
I think
you?
that's very well said. I would say from faculty, Shannon has said, first, we were saying, do you need technology support? We had faculty who loved teaching online and faculty who said, I don't even know where the button is to do this. And so we had to do some training. We used some stimulus dollars to provide some training for faculty. But then in this last legislative session, the governor said, we're going to do a statewide faculty pay raise so that we can support the retention of our faculty. When it comes to students, we knew they needed predictability and stability, but also affordability. So we came forward and said, for our institutions to do well, we need to use some stimulus dollars to reboot Louisiana short-term high-demand credentials for people who've been displaced, an adult promise program so that we have adult financial aid, $11 million more in need-based aid. So I think our institutions do well when we're serving students and meeting our students and faculty where they are. And that's policy and practice, but fiscal policy as well.
Yes, remarkable ideas. I think the nimble use of resources to make sure that your institutions have what they need and can remain vibrant and relevant. Let's pick up on that thread a little bit, the thread about relevance and quality. I think a big shift that many of us have seen in post-secondary ed is a discussion about what credentials are needed. What types of credentials? What are the workforce demands? What do our industries say they need? As you pointed to, Shannon, four-year institutions are not known for their nimble adaptability, and yet we've seen interesting things and important things happen. So I'd like to pick up on what you have done in your work and in your states to better align workforce needs and the types of education and credentials that you are providing to help genuinely move people from education to employment. We can look at so much of what's happened in post-secondary ed and say, perhaps we have not done our work as well as we need to, ensuring outcomes beyond completion of a credential. Lots of focus on access that's relevant and will remain relevant. Completion, important, but what outcomes people actually achieve from their credential? I think you've both been working on this. Kim, let's hear from you.
So I would say, first of all, Ruth, thank you for talking about the education to employment pipeline. I think that's important. Sometimes we'll have faculty who'll say, well, this is about citizenship. Yes, it is. But there are very few students I talk to who say, I just want to learn something cool. They say, I want to learn something cool, and then I want to do something cool with it. employment. So I would say a couple of things. One, immediately as we think about the pandemic and the short-term credentials, we did engage our regional economic developers to ask, what are the jobs of today in a COVID economy, with a shuttered economy? You had to first figure out what were the immediate needs. And so we took time to do that and then align credentials to that. The other thing I would say for us, that's another example, is undergraduate certificates. So our technology companies came forward and said, we love our liberal arts students, we need to plus them up. So why don't you think about an undergraduate certificate as well? So listening to business and industry, listening to regional economic developers, and then having the ability to pivot and to say to our institutions, here's where the needs are, and let's think about how to do that. The other thing I would say certainly is healthcare, and teachers. And how do we continue to advance that work? Certainly as we move beyond a pandemic, but great teachers are the profession that makes all others possible. So we certainly have to think about those critical areas as well, and trying to get more students interested in being educators and healthcare heroes too.
Thank you so much. Shannon.
Sure. Well, I think we've been in this last couple of decades in higher education where most states have set post-secondary attainment goals. We certainly have one in Rhode Island. 70% of our Rhode Islanders have some form of a credential by 2025. But I think we have to shift that thing into attainment with a purpose, with specific alignment with labor market. And the way I look at that is that it has to be coupled with both academic knowledge, but also technical skills. So that would be point one on how to be relevant. The second is this idea that, and this is why I think higher education matters more today than it ever has before, is this that higher education is a pursuit of truth and knowledge and civility, and having a place in our society where we can have disagreements and discourse. That is both a societal end, but it's also an economic and workforce end, because employers are telling us the future of work, we need folks that can communicate, that can be tolerant in the workplace, that can have social emotional intelligence. Higher education, or education in general, is the bubble where that can happen. And that, coupled with a labor market alignment, is, I think, the way the industry needs to be responsive and have that value proposition to society.
I do think, just one other quick point, Ruth, I do think that Shannon's previous point is an important one. We see it in Louisiana. The relevance of the credential is that you are more likely economically to be pandemic proof and recession proof. You have the luxury of working from home. You have good health care. You have discretionary income. So when things happen, you have that buffer. Those individuals who don't have the credential do not have that. And I think that's an important elevation of the relevance of the credential and the relevance of the learning, is that it's not just about, certainly not just about institutions serving individuals well, but the result is that families and communities and states are stronger when more people have access to credentials.
So well said. And I want to pick up on this thread a little bit. I'm wondering about what kind of barriers you may have encountered as you worked with your institutions to move more in this nimble relevance ed to employment kind of pathway. And then how you've addressed those barriers, whether you've used incentives to help motivate institutions to move in directions, or how you've approached it. And whichever one of you wants to go first.
Thanks, Shannon. So change is hard. And so I think we always have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge that this has been a really hard 18 plus months. And so we've done carrot and stick, right? We've talked about the expectations. I cannot tell you how many people have said to me, or parents have said, it's just not high quality anymore because it's online. And so how do you think about a hybrid experience that is very high quality for students? And how do we meet that moment? I think that's very important. So we've certainly had to engage our institutions to talk about expectations of students and families. How do you make sure that every course is not an online course? Is there a way for us in a pandemic to make sure students are safe enough to have some experiences on their college campus? How do we make sure that there are resources to encourage institutions to innovate and to reward those early adopters who have taken on the hard work. One example I would share from Louisiana is we wanted to redesign high schools so that more students graduate high school with an associate degree. And so we matched dollar for dollar with our K-12 partners some funding so that every region of our state would have a pilot. K-12, higher ed, and workforce working together to redesign the 11th and 12th grade years so that students will graduate high school with an associate degree. So you have to reward early adopters. You have to bring partners together. And I think that that's an important conversation. But also it's possible because people say, here's a new expectation. We just can't do it the same way and expect different results. We have to get better.
Yeah, that's so well said. Higher education is built on a 1,000-year-old model of students coming to campus. And we're at a population, at least in Rhode Island, we have about 52% of our population with some form of a credential. If we're going to reach that other 50%, 48%, we have to meet people where they are in local communities and get off campuses and figure out how to deliver higher education with industry as a partner in a community by community. We can't continue to do things the same way, delivering with the same methods and expect to really have that mass educated society that we all know that we need. And higher education is really, in our view, or my view, the pivot point of that. So I think that's the opportunity there for us. I think one of the barriers is that, and I think one of the challenges right now that higher ed is experiencing is enrollment because of the pandemic across the country at our community colleges, our comprehensive institutions, and some of our research institutions. We're not seeing that rebound of enrollment. Maybe there's apprehension because of the safety of the campuses, or there's childcare issues for community college students, particularly women. And so I think that's an opportunity for higher ed to take a hard look at its delivery model and see new innovative ways to kind of close those traditional ways that we engage students in the adult population and certainly our K-12 students.
Well, let's pick up on that a little bit. I think the four-year institutions, and you both alluded to this, have long rested on the thought that they don't actually prepare people for a particular career, with a few exceptions, but for the most part, that they're helping students learn durable, evergreen skills that will last them through a lifetime, not to get their first job, but to invent their fifth job, right? I wonder if you're seeing evidence that we might be at a moment where we are going to say, we must continue to do that and we can embed skills, and wonder what you're seeing happen there, whether you're seeing those skills-based certificates be embedded in four-year degrees, and what you might be doing to catalyze students' participation in those kind of skills. So you want to go ahead, Shannon?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think the liberal arts education has a huge opportunity to lead in this space. We know that general education and liberal arts education are the skills that companies look for when they look at management roles, when they look at leaders of, coming up with that next research and development idea for that new business. And so how do you couple that with career-related experiences to get them that first job? And on the back end, when we have like our community college system, and I'm oversimplifying this, but when you have a community college system that is at the forefront of developing technical skills, how do you back those students into a liberal arts or general education so they can have those critical thinking, communication, social emotional intelligence, all the value of a liberal arts education? How do we blend that together over the course of a career, not in maybe just a condensed 2 or 4 year period, so that we have a much stronger, much holistic workforce?
Excellent.
I would say one of the things that we certainly have tried to think through, and it's a Colorado model that I'm certainly focused on in Louisiana, is blurring lines between K-12, higher ed, and workforce. So, students are college and career ready in high school because they have a college and career experience in high school. How do we think about work-based learning as a reality for every student so that they have an ability to navigate, an ability to see the world of work early on? I think those things are very important, because when we talk about underserved students, we talk about equity gaps, we talk about opportunity gaps, students who don't know what they can be because they've never seen it. And so how do we think about system redesign that builds in those kinds of experiences as a reality for all students, not just for some? And then also a conversation that I've been having with a couple of institutions about the career services experience, right? It's a afterthought in the senior year, not a first thought in the freshman year. And so how do we talk about that and make sure that the students are having that conversation at the beginning? How do you monetize your passion? What do you know about your passion? How do you map your aptitude and interest to the world of work? So these are the conversations that I think are exciting for us. And I would say on the flip side, as we see help wanted signs everywhere, we have to think about from the business partnership, how do we now strike while the iron's hot and have businesses engage in making sure that they're upskilling workers, and that be a way to recruit and retain employees in a time when really people need more employees than ever before. So I think the deep partnerships are very important, getting out of our silos and really thinking about how to redesign the work. Very important.
If I'll pick up on that, because I think it's so well said, is I think this is how we turn the pandemic into an innovative space. First, let's continue to blur those K-12 to post-secondary lines. If you think about it from a user end, a student, they don't silo out K-12 education or higher education. They just want a good education to go to that next part of their life. We do that as educators. We section and develop these little organizational structures to an end. And so let's, particularly in the K-12 to post-secondary transition space, let's break that down. You know, I started my career off as a high school teacher, tutoring students that we graduated from our high school that weren't ready for college level math. And we were just disoriented and just flummoxed that this had happened. And I think a lot of that is because we've set this big gap in the structure of our education system between K-12 education and college admission and matriculation. So I think we can reorganize ourselves through collaborative partnerships to really blow those lines. And the second thing is business and industry. There's a great tool called Talent Pipeline Management System developed by the U.S. Chamber to really look at supply chain technology to back map where businesses can look at how to fill these gaps. When I was in Kentucky, we implemented it as a state, and it really brought employers into a safe space to tell us what they need by industry across. Well, in Kentucky, there's a little bit of bourbon, so by distilling, a little bit of horses, so by equine. So you really got to understand what is the pressures facing those industries from the equine perspective, from the distilling perspective. And then you said, okay, a distilling industry needs electricians. They need PhDs in horticulture. They need biologists. And then you take a proactive strategic approach across your education system, K-12 and higher ed, and even labor and training to address those gaps. And I think those time of blurring the lines between K-12, education, business, and industry, completely the next wave of higher education.
I would say these two commissioners are pretty remarkable. They've got fabulous ideas for the future and creating opportunity from a very difficult time. So many positive threads. I think internships, highly powerful, redesign of career centers, and probably having to think about paid internships because that's how we're going to close equity gaps. You've both touched on the issue of genuine stackability, which I think for the most part is a little bit more of a dream than a reality in many places, that we have a variety of steps and credentials that will meaningfully lead onward. I know, and I can say this as a critic of higher ed, as well as a member of higher ed, that too many four-year institutions have not valued credentials and things that students are bringing. In fact, the incentives are almost all the other way to not value them. Do you have thoughts on how we can do better there and what you're seeing and trying to catalyze in your states to genuinely create and value the credentials and the learning that students are building along the pathway?
So a couple of things in that, Ruth, and thank you for that. First of all, the mindset change in your question, I think, is an important one. It's not about seat time. It's not about the diploma as a proxy for learning. It is competencies and skills that we can demonstrate and that students can articulate as they move forward. And I think that is a big shift and an important one that we have to think about. So how do we think about that work? How do we think about prior learning assessment? How do we think about stackable credentials? These are conversations that we certainly are leaning into. I think some innovators, some are moving faster than others in this work. None of us are moving fast enough for what the students need, adult learners, particularly as they come back. And so I do think this moment in time gives us an opportunity to reset. And certainly business and industry are an important part of this conversation. As I've said to many of them, you signal and we respond. And that's the reality in a lot of places when it comes to higher education and business. So when business says, we're looking for skills, we're looking for competencies, our job description looks like this. It's not the bachelor's degree. That's the first hurdle through the HR. It's clear competencies. That's a different conversation. So I think that's important as well. So I think all around the bend to your question, to the answer to your question, yes, we need to do more. No, we're not going fast enough.
Yeah, I think understanding what a credential of value is state by state, bringing together K-12, post-secondary, labor, commerce, and how those things align and don't align. I think it starts with a simple coalition of leadership that really maps that out for the state. And then I think it's really a buy-in at the operational level, the K-12 schools, the institutions of higher education, to align those credentials of value. That has to be driven by where the state economy currently is and where it wants to go. So I think that's a way to operationalize that, and then bring in the strategies of delivery to do that, competencies and skills, which is not just of course a skill. Pipe fitting is a skill, but communication is a skill too, and critical thinking is a skill. And so how do we redefine or evolve our understanding of defining what skills and academic knowledge looks like, and then braid those together to meet those credentials of value?
And I think for this to work well, we have to get out of the ad hoc one-off approach. There has to be a more unified system and way to look at and value skills that doesn't require an individual evaluation of someone's credentials, because the cumbersome nature of that is what has stopped it from working well for learners, I think, for a long time. You've both touched on the role of industry and the way industry is a partner with both of you, and could be a partner if we think about public-private partnerships and ways that industry needs, and industry's investment in talent might be able to help you as commissioners with your post-secondary systems. Let's talk about, maybe you could each give an example or two of where you see that collaboration and partnership really excelling and what you hope we can do more of looking forward.
Yeah, we have an industry partnership with Electric Boat, which makes submarines for our Navy in the U.S. in Rhode Island. And we have developed an education center in Westerly in Rhode Island to deliver demand-driven, customized training and education to fill the pipeline of people at Electric Boat. We're moving towards a submarine class that is significant in this country. And if you look at the projections of pipe fitters and engineers that company is going to need to help fill our defense system, it's mind-boggling. And can the education systems across K-12 and higher ed come together and fill that pipeline? So that's, I think, a public-private partnership that is exciting to see, because it allows us to learn a lot about how we bring employers into the conversation about talent pipeline, and how we can duplicate that across healthcare and cybersecurity and other key industries in this country.
And hopefully those industries will want to help support students along the journey financially, because that is such a critical element, I think, of making this actually work. I don't know, Kim, do you have examples?
I would say probably one example, DXC in New Orleans recruited a technology company in. They came in and said, we need some very specific skills that we don't see. So they put together a university council, had faculty engaged, provost engaged, so that they could really build what they needed. So very specific intentional design on talent development, and then students having the opportunity to participate. So I think we have examples of that in our community colleges across the state, whether it's EMTs, healthcare, et cetera. where companies are investing and providing good feedback, real-time feedback to faculty about what the students need so they're work ready on day one. But I do want to speak to your comment, Ruth, about system redesign, right? So we don't need just the one-off companies. Those are great. What we need is a full court press of business and industry sitting at the table with us, talking about how are they advocates for education? How are they champions for workforce development and work-based learning experience? How are they financially resourcing the students and the leaders of the future? That is the kind of work that I think is sustainable and can really make a difference in terms of transformational change. And that's what we need at this moment in time. The students, our kids, college educated individuals, our kids are going to like Energizer Bunny. They're going to get there. But there's so many kids who are first in their family who have no college knowledge, and America will not, our states will not be as great as they can be until we make sure the least of these have an opportunity to get that life-changing credential.
And of course, it's also highly relevant for economic vibrancy in our states and in our communities. I've certainly, in my past life as a university leader, had some of our major national companies say, if you are not producing more graduates from diverse backgrounds who are working with the world and selling products to the world, we won't be able to keep a headquarters here. So it has a very virtuous circle of relevance.
I believe there's an untapped coalition of local leaders, mayors around our states. I grew up in a southwest county in Kentucky, a coal county, where the industry has by and large left without that next plan to refill it. And the same examples, there's examples all over the country in the Rust Belt in Rhode Island with textiles, where the economies are leaving, but there isn't something to backfill it. And we know that is driven by post-secondary credentials and education and research development. It's all aligned. I think that coalition of local leadership and we know that local municipalities are getting an influx of stimulus dollars that are coming from the federals. How do we make the connection of higher education and post-secondary credentials helping that long-term livelihood of local communities? I think there's an untapped potential there.
Very well said. So with our just a couple of minutes left, let's dream. Let's imagine the possibilities for better post-secondary education 2025. Post-secondary ed that delivers outcomes beyond completion of a credential to employment, to all the benefits that accrue with an educated population, from health to well-being to economic stability and mobility. What would you want to put out as your North Star for how we get there? A hard question but let's think about what's possible and how we move forward, taking what we've learned in this difficult time and perpetuating what we want to get to that aim.
So the North Star is obviously educational opportunity for all, not some. So that means it's affordable, it's equitable, accessible, and it's lifelong. And so you build structures around that to make sure that everyone has that opportunity. Everyone doesn't have to have a four-year degree, but everyone should be able to map their aptitude and interest to the world of work and have access to a credential that is transformational for them and their families. And so that would be my North Star, not just because I know it'll make a difference for that graduate who we shake hands with or hug as they cross the stage, but their children and their children's children. So that's my North Star for sure.
Yes, I'll just underscore what Kim said. It's attainment with a purpose that really couples academic knowledge and technical skills for everyone, not just a subset of the population in this country. And then I would also add that we have to really appreciate the fullness of how our institutions of higher education and our K-12 sector develops the citizenry as much as it does develop the person with the skill sets to make that widget or work in that management position, and make sure we protect, enhance, and grow that opportunity, because we're going to have a much more tolerant society.
You really can't beat this panel. These commissioners are great. Thank you so much.